how should you build your F-150? There are a lot of different options for the configuration, what's going on underneath the hood, trim levels, and then you get into the complicated things like max towing and payload capacities. There are a ton of different things that you should be asking yourself when you're building a truck out. Steve here, and in this video I'm going to be demystifying the configuration options for the 2022 F-150. I'm going to be showing you some real-world scenarios as well, looking at different payload capacities, towing capacities, and pretty much everything in between. I do also want to say thank you so much for helping this channel grow the way that it has. I know it does fall back on the content that I'm creating, and you're obviously enjoying the content that I'm putting out there, so I appreciate it like so much. Being able to go from doing this part-time into a full-time endeavor, like 2 years ago when I started this channel, I never would have thought that I could consider myself a full-time YouTuber. I love that it's become a full-time gig for me. This is absolutely amazing. And the plan is to keep on pumping out good content like this. So if you're not already subscribed, make sure to hit that subscribe button, but let's get back to it. So let's start off with what's going on with the configurations. And the first one we're looking at is going to be the regular cab for the F-150. And this thing is available in either the 6.5 or the 8-foot box with the introductory, so the XL trim level or the XLT. Now both of these things are going to be cloth seats. You don't have the option for leather inside of either of these trim levels of the vehicle when you're looking at the regular cab as an option. So if you're looking at leather, you're looking at least the super cab, and then we've also got the crew cab or the super crew, which we'll touch on in just a second. But the super cab is when you get the 2 full doors and the 2 half doors. Same idea, you've got the 6.5 or the 8-foot box as an option, with the lariat trim as the new addition inside of the super cab configuration. And then the lariat is the one where we get those leather seats. So if you're looking for something where you've got a 5 or a 6 seat configuration, the super cab should be your minimum choice. But if you need more space, the super crew is where you want to be, and we have a series of different trim levels that are introduced as part of the super crew configuration. One other thing to note, the 8-foot box is not available in the super crew, so we're strictly looking at either the 5.5 or the 6.5-foot box. But we've got a few options, like we get into the base XL all the way up to the limited, the Tremor, and the Raptor, with the Tremor and the Raptor being more for those off-road types of vehicles. So if you're looking for something off-road, you're really about off-roading, the Raptor might be for you, but it's a little bit pricey. So if you're looking for kind of a sweet spot, the Tremor is a really good option. And the Tremor would actually be a little bit more on par with, I'd kind of say like an XLT versus a Lariat. It's kind of like that right in between, especially when you look at the 402A package. There are a ton of other options for engines for this vehicle as well, starting off with the base 3.3 liter V6 engine. This thing, 290 horsepower, 265 pound-feet of torque, and this is going to be the entry-level engine for the base models of the truck. Now, it's going to depend on your configuration because when we get into some options, it might be the 2.7 engine or the 5-liter V8 as your default engine instead. So having said that, the 2.7-liter EcoBoost, 325 horses, 400 pound-feet of torque, and this one is going to be the configuration option that you're looking at as default for the engine when you get into some of those longer boxes, the Lariat trim level, things like that. But looking next up, we've also got the Old Faithful, so that 5-liter V8 engine. So if you're not a fan of the idea of turbocharged engine whatsoever, you still do have Old Faithful, so that 5-liter V8 still available for the F-150. Now we also do have the 3.5-liter EcoBoost, 400 horsepower, 500 pound-feet of torque, so a ton of power inside of this thing, and the majority, well, all of Ford engines really only need 87 octane, so 87 fuel at the minimum, including this thing, the Power Boost that was introduced in the 2021 F-150, and that's the hybrid. One of the things that I love about the hybrid, so the Power Boost, is that we do have the option for up to a 7.2 kilowatt hour battery. So you're essentially using this thing as a generator, which is absolutely beautiful. Now, one thing that's not covered off here is the Lightning. That thing is literally its own separate beast. I'm going to be releasing a video specifically on the Lightning at some point over the course of the next couple weeks. So I haven't had a hands-on with that thing as of yet, but once I do, definitely going to be unpacking it, doing a video like this specifically about the Lightning. One other thing to point out about the engines is that if you're looking for the turbo diesel, unfortunately it's no longer available for the 2022 F-150. Ford actually, well, they scrapped the engine, so you couldn't even get it if you ordered one where the 22s were first announced. But if you're looking for a diesel engine, you're looking at least the F250. And you have a series of different options, like the trim levels and things like that are all the same. One of the benefits of the F250 is you're going to have a higher payload and towing capacity depending on the configuration. But there are so many different options, and just based off of the basic configurations there, with not only the available configurations like the regular cab, super cab, but then you've got the engine options. But from engine options, we move into the max payload, and that's where things are kind of all over the place. Because the max payloads in the Ford guides are good, but they're based off of having a truck that doesn't have anything else added to it. So you're looking at your stripped down numbers there. But when you add anything into the truck, you add in a sunroof, you add in running boards, if you've got the FX4 package, everything has a net weight. And that net weight is going to end up taking away what your max payload would be. So looking at some different options here, the numbers are all over the place, like literally all over the place for this thing. Like payload for the regular cab, we're 2,620 pounds when we've got the 8-foot box and the 4x2. When we add on other packages, so that's where we get those little asterisks. That's when we've got the heavy duty payload package. Now there's a little bit of a caveat to that payload package across the board, because we can't get something like the limited or the platinum with that payload package. You're pretty much limited. I believe it's the 301A XLT if you need that heavy duty payload package. But we do have a nice amount of payload available all through the board. But again, one big thing about these payload numbers is they are based off of using nothing else in the truck. So with nothing else in the truck whatsoever, it's literally just a stripped down baby form, no added options or anything in between. It's just the truck by itself. So as we start adding things in, we go from the super cab to the super crew, 4x2 to 4x4, we add in the sunroof and other things, everything pulls away from your max payload. So I am going to be giving some examples a little bit later on, but this is just going to be the base max payload numbers that are available inside of the 22 F150. And as you can see, they're all over the place. And like I said, these are based off of just the basic numbers with a stripped down truck. Once you add in anything, any other options and things like that, they will take away from your max payload capacity inside of the vehicle. I do wish that Ford was a little bit more upfront with what your end vehicle payload is going to be, but it's always a good idea to err on the side of caution and get too much, because the last thing you want is to have a truck that can't pull what you need it to pull. So what we're going to look at is some F-150 max payload scenarios. And I think this is kind of the cream of the crop, which is the best available option for your payload. So if you're looking for the very max, these are the configurations that you want to go for. We're going to look at some rearward scenarios in just a second, but starting off with our base highest available payload, we've got our regular cab. So 4x2 with the 8-foot box. This thing's got the 5-liter V8 engine. You're going to max out at 3,325 pounds when you have a configuration like this, without anything else added on. And that's going to be the recurring theme in these examples that I'm giving you here. But it's if you're looking for the maximum available payload for your F-150. So next up for another scenario is going to be our super cab. So super cab 4x2, 8-foot box with a 5-liter V8 engine. Heavy-duty payload package is going to give you a little over 3,000 pounds. Now, that's going to be a recurring theme with the 5-liter engine. It is going to pull payload is going to be slightly better than the 3.5-liter EcoBoost. Not a crazy amount different, but slightly different, because if we look at this scenario, the Super Crew, 2,900 pounds as the max payload capacity, and then when we look at the 3.5 EcoBoost, it's 2,880 pounds. So the two of them aren't that far off from one another. So if you're wanting kind of better fuel economy, you're wanting to pull a little bit more because the EcoBoost also has better towing, you could look at the 3.5 EcoBoost over the 5-liter. They're literally like neck and neck between one another. So next up, popular builds. And this is the important one. So these are rear-world scenarios based off of the builds for the trucks. So the first one is a Super Crew 4x4, XLT 302 with the Sport Pack and a few other extras. The max on paper is 1,830 pounds versus the actual maximum capacity inside of this truck on that yellow payload sticker on the door, 1,690 pounds. So adding some of these different options on, it essentially pulls off 140 pounds off of the towing for the Ford guides versus rear world scenario. And it's the same idea with this truck. So it's the Super Crew Lariat 4x4, 5.5-foot box with the power running boards, FX4 package, and a few others. The max on paper is 1,830 pounds, with the actual max at 1,317. Like that, it is mind-blowing how different these payload capacities are on the max payload on paper versus the actual payload when you get the truck. And that's why it's always a good idea to get a little bit too much, because you may not have enough when the truck actually lands and you see that sticker. We've got the Super Crew 4x4 again with the 3.5 EcoBoost 302A package, which the 302A is one of the best-selling F150s, and that's why you've seen it a couple times here, but I'm just giving you some scenarios and some different options that might be available. But we look at this one, and on paper, this configuration has up to a 2,100 pound max payload capacity, when in reality on that yellow payload sticker, 1,714 pounds. So this thing took almost a 20% hit on the max payload just because of the options that have been included inside of the truck. Next up, we've got a Super Crew, another one, so 6.5 foot box this time with that old Coyote, the 5-liter V8 engine, 302A with a few extras, max on paper 2135 with the actual payload at 1,751 pounds. So a teeny little bit of a discrepancy between what's on paper versus what the actual payload capacity is going to be. And that's why it's so important to figure out exactly what you're pulling, because there are so many things that you have to take into account. Now, unfortunately, as you're building these trucks out online, it doesn't update it with the actual payload. That's like one thing I wish Ford would do. I think it would be an amazing scenario to be able to see real time what your payload's going to be. But just realistically, based off of what we're looking at here, kind of a conservative estimate is whatever your truck configuration is, take about 20% off of that. If you're adding some different things on, that's going to be your actual payload. So 20-ish% kind of to be safe. And that's when we get into things like max towing and max payload capacities, because you can max it at one thing, but the two numbers are kind of interchangeable. Because let's say if we've got 1,000 pounds worth of payload, so you've got, a few extra people in the truck, you've got some stuff in the back, so in the bed of the truck, let's say 1,000 pounds total is going to take away from your max towing capacity. The tongue weight of your trailer, that's going to take away from your max payload. It also takes away from your max towing capacity. So that's something you have to think of. If you need to get, let's say, 10,000, 12,000 pounds max towing, you could look at the max configuration, which is a 3.5 EcoBoost, but you might be better off looking at a Super Duty instead. Because looking at towing in these things, you can get up to 14,000 pounds, but at the same time, you don't want to max out at what the truck can max out at, because that's not going to take steep grades into account. You're taking this thing all the time. You could put the engine under too much load, which could lead to mechanical issues and things like that. So if you're kind of getting up to that max payload towing number in the F-150, trust me, do yourself a favor, get yourself into a Super Duty instead, and you're going to definitely thank yourself for doing that, because the last thing you want is to spend all this money on a truck and not be able to pull what you wanted to pull because you've gone with too little. In the truck world, it's better to have a little bit too much than not enough. So we're going to look at some max towing scenarios now. So we've got that Super Crew 4x4, again, that 302A XLT. The base towing is going to be 10,400 pounds at a minimum, but we throw on that max tow package, and all of a sudden we do also have up to 13,000 pounds towing capacity. So a pretty crazy amount considering the truck. So I love that we've got so much towing capacity inside of this thing. Another example here, we've got the Super Crew 4x4, so it's the Lariat 502. Base towing inside of this truck is 7,700 pounds, and when we throw out a few extra packages, we're maxing out at 10,100 pounds. So a little bit all over the place. We've got axle ratios and things like that that are going to take into effect there, but we'll touch on that one in just a second. We also do have our regular cab, so 4x2, and this is the base XL 101. 6.5 foot box, 3.55 axle ratio is going to give you a 5,000 pound towing capacity, but when we bump it up to the 373, it pushes it up to 8,200 pounds. And it's kind of crazy when you think about it. Like we've got our base, so our lower axle ratios like the 331, we've got the 355, the 373, and these ratios are all over the place. And one thing to think about, so the idea behind the axle ratio, that's the number of times that the drive shaft needs to rotate in order for the wheels to rotate once. So you've got your 355, that means that it needs to rotate 3.55 times for your wheels to turn once. So benefit downside, when you've got a higher number like that 355 or 373, as you saw in the examples, it does increase your max towing capacity. But when you get into those higher numbers, it's also going to negatively affect your fuel economy. It's not like crazy, like it's not going to be like a 10 or 20% difference or anything, but the higher that number, the worse your fuel economy is going to be, but the better your acceleration is going to be all at the same time. So there are a lot of things to look at, and there's a huge balancing game. So when you look at some other packages like the FX4 package, that's potentially going to give you a 355 or a 373 axle ratio. So a lot of different things to consider there. Another thing to consider are what's going on with the towing options, because we've got our base trailer hitch. Like you could do something aftermarket, go to U-Haul and get something installed if you want to, but you get it done from the factory. You've got at least your base, so that class 4 trailer hitch, which has our 4 7-pin connectors, the receiver, as well as the smart tow connector, which is a nice option. But then we get into the trailer tow package, and that's the fuller package that's available. Same thing as above, but it also gives us the Pro Trailer Backup Assist, which is kind of neat. So rather than counter steering the steering wheel, you twist this handy little knob, and it's automatically going to counter steer for you. We've also got the integrated brake controller and the tailgate LED. The brake controller is an interesting one because even if you don't get it from the factory, you could install it aftermarket. It's pretty much the same cost through the factory as aftermarket anyways, but if your trailer does demand that electronic braking, just knowing that you can get it done aftermarket, looks the exact same, functions the exact same. But then we get into our max trailer tow package. And the max trailer tow package, big differences here would be we'd have either a 355 or a 373 axle ratio, and that's going to depend on the rest of the truck configuration. But the big thing is we also have an upgraded rear bumper. So that rear enforced bumper is going to be what gives us that higher towing capacity. So we don't have engine oil coolers and things like that in the F150 anymore. It's all essentially just mechanical now. I guess technically that oil cooler is mechanical, but here nor there. It's not available in the max tow package in the F150 anymore. Just a higher axle ratio and that upgraded rear bumper, which does give us that added pulling power. But we have a series of different options that are available from the factory. You could do some of these things aftermarket. Like even if you have a base truck with like a 313 axle ratio or 331 axle ratio, you could upgrade it to a 373 aftermarket. Just going to cost you a couple bucks to do it aftermarket versus doing it from the factory. And then from the factory, you've got either your non-slip, your non-limited slip, or you've got your electronic locking. So a few different options that are available there. Now, the next one is going to be when you get into some of those heavier towings, because you could technically just, you've got your ball, slide it on and you're good to go. But once you get up to a certain weight, like if you look at the Ford tow guides, you see that either 5,000 or 7,000 pound maximum. That's because you should technically, after you hit those weights, look at using a weight distribution hitch. And weight distribution hitches are interesting. They look something kind of like this, where you've got your base bars there, and then you've got chains. And this specific one doesn't have chains, but essentially what would happen is you'd have something in order to balance the load out. Because when we look at traditional towing, what might happen, actually, I've got a cool picture to show you here. But what happens is if you've got too heavy of a load on the tongue of the trailer, so on the end of the trailer, you get this like V look, where you've essentially loaded up the rear axle of the truck and the front axle of the trailer. So you get kind of this like weird V in the middle, and that's where you kind of, your front kind of looks like it's lifted up a little bit higher. That's because the trailer weight is too much for the vehicle to handle as is. So you definitely need to look at a weight distributing hitch instead, because what the weight distributing hitch does, it essentially takes that load and it evenly distributes it across all of the axles of the truck and the trailer. So I'm going to show you an example of what that looks like real world, because like it's amazing what this thing does. So you've got your base weight distribution hitch, which looks something like this. So you've got your base set up, and then you take your base measurement there, and then you've got this little piece right in the middle of the actual hitch. You remove that. That gives you the V, but then it's either going to be a manual or electronic in order to balance the truck out so it looks like the picture on the bottom. And what that does, like I said, it's going to evenly balance the weight across the entire vehicle and across the trailer so that you're pulling a little bit more evenly. And as I mentioned, as you get into those heavier weights, that's something you want to make sure you do so that you're not overloading the truck or trailer. Now, there are some things to consider inside of the truck as well, so a lot of different things that are available aftermarket from the factory, etc. One cool one is the auto start-stop removal. So that system, it was available late 2021, and Ford continued it into 2022. There are very specific conditions you have to meet in the truck in order to get it, but it's amazing that you've got the flexibility to have that start-stop removal done directly from the factory. You technically could, I was chatting with a few dealers, you could technically get it done aftermarket, but you're paying substantially high, they quoted me between $1,000 and $1,500 to get it removed aftermarket, compared to saving $60 if you get a factory order. So if you've got a 22 F-150 on order, try to get the dealer to put that option on. You might luck out if your vehicle hasn't been serialized yet, and even if it hasn't entered the production cycle, they might be able to sneak that option in. But if the idea of having to push that button to have that start-stop system turn off, if that just drives you nuts, you can get it removed from the factory just using that option code and just let the dealer know that's something that you want. And then some other great options. You've got different options for tonneau covers, and like tonneau covers, you've got all sorts of options for the bed of the truck and things like that. Like the tonneau cover is kind of a neat one because there are so many different options available for the tonneau covers. Like you've got your base, you've got your hard and soft. There's hard rolling, soft rolling, hard, and the big one I guess would be the trifold hardtop. It's probably the one I see the most popular one. That's essentially going to be 3 individual or 4, depending on the box size, layers, where you're essentially just folding this thing up and over itself. You've got clips in order to kind of lock it into place there if you've got things in the bed of the truck. You can get truck caps and a number of other things on top of that. And then one other cool thing that you could look at would be the bed liners. And bed liners, same thing, a lot of different options from the factory and aftermarket. You've got either a plastic plastic drop-in or a spray-in bed liner. Plastic option, same idea from the factory or aftermarket, and same thing with the spray-in. Now, one thing I have noticed with the spray-in from the factory is that it's good, it's okay, and you know that it's from the factory because on the bed of the truck, on the very far side of it, just underneath the rear window, you'll see a Ford logo there. That's when you know that it's a factory spray-in bed liner. But there are some good aftermarket solutions that are available instead. And one company that I normally recommend is Line-X. And it's an incredible liner. It's about twice as thick as the factory liner, and it also has a lifetime warranty. So which way you go is going to be your choice, but I do recommend just looking at the aftermarket solution instead. Lifetime warranty, twice as thick, always a nice thing. One other great thing, especially when you get into some of the higher trim levels of the truck, there is the option for massage chair seats, which is amazing. I know it's like the idea of glamping. Like you're in a truck, you're glamping in your truck essentially with this thing. But if you're on the road all the time, having these seats is unbelievable because you get a lower back massage and a hamstring massage. So if you have a tendency to get tight hips, tight lower back as you're driving, you can just flip those things on, and it's got a few different options available, but it is amazing. And then the next one, being on the topic of being in the truck for a while, if you're the type of person where you're a construction worker or you're just working from the car or for the truck a lot of the times, the interior work surface area. Like it blows my mind why this thing wasn't introduced sooner, but whoever thought of this, absolute genius. So the console, that's one thing. It does need the console in the middle. So if you have the bench seat, so that full 6 seat, you're not going to be able to get this option. But what it would do in the armrest, rather than the armrest just folding up, you can fold it the opposite way. So the shifter would fold down, and then you can extend this thing out to give you a flat work surface area for the inside of the truck. Such a brilliant thing, especially if you're going to be working in the truck. So if you're going to need to take notes, if you're writing things down, if you're working off of a laptop, things like that, this thing is amazing. In Canada, it's $400 to get it done from the factory. Could you maybe do it aftermarket? Maybe, if you can find one of these things, because unfortunately these things are limited availability. So if you get it added onto your truck, it might push the build date a little bit, but it's a great thing. If you need it, go for it. It's always going to help the resale value of the truck as well. Like there are certain components that do, but when you get into some base ones like the XLT 302, you get into the Lariat, things like that, those things typically sell well, especially the way that the market's going right now. Like I've got people that have looked at trading trucks in like a year or two ago, like friends that have looked at a year or so ago. They waited a year because of the chip shortage. Their vehicle's got more kilometers or more miles on it, and they're being offered more for the trade-in now instead. So if you're contemplating trading your vehicle or if you need a new truck, now might be the time to do that. So ideally do a factory order because things are a little bit limited on the ground for dealers right now, and there might be different incentives and things like that could be available, but there are some options to consider for your truck. But I mean, lots of things to consider between different engine options, max payload towing capacity, specs, and things like that. And this just kind of scratches the surface. I definitely recommend finding a dealer that you can connect with. Find a sales rep specifically that you can connect with, and don't feel bad about, emailing in or calling in and talking to a few different people until you find the person that's right for you. There's nothing wrong with doing that because you want to make sure you find someone that's asking the right questions and not just trying to sell you something, but there's somebody that's genuinely listening to what your needs are and getting you the right truck for that. That's the person you're looking for, the person that's going to ask the right questions. And you have to ask the right questions to find the person that can ask the right questions, if that makes sense. So you're looking for somebody with experience speccing out trucks that knows what they're doing and can help you find the exact build that you're looking for. 9 times out of 10 right now, because of the shortages, you're probably doing a factory order anyways, but get that factory order in, because depending on the build, you're anywhere from 2 months to 4 months roughly in a time frame. So it's ultimately going to depend on what other options and things like that you have in your truck. The more basic it is, the more likely it is you're going to get it sooner. If that black appearance package is a must for you, you're going to be waiting a little bit longer to get it. So recording this video in February, if you wanted the black appearance package, it's a late availability. So you're probably 4 to 6 months, maybe a little bit longer to get it. But at the same time, you put your order in now, and it may be here sooner than you think. But that was a base look at some of the max payload, towing capacities, and a number of other things inside this truck. I know there's a lot to cover off, so if you're looking for something specific like technology, like how to use the Sync 4 screen, steering wheel cluster, you want to walk through on the XLT, the Lariat, etc., check down below. I've put together a ton of crazy comprehensive videos that covers all of this stuff off, showing you the interior of the truck and a few other things. But if you have any questions, you're not really sure about the configuration you should go for, drop down in the comment section below and let me know. We can kind of bounce ideas off of each other. I can set you up with a dealer in your area on top of that. But if you thought this video was useful, give it a thumbs up, share it with your social networks because it absolutely helps the channel grow. And think about subscribing because this channel's growing like crazy and I'd love for you to be part of when we get 100,000 and up to 1 million plus subscribers. Like I'm so excited to be able to hit those marks. But until I see you guys next time, take care.